doing it on this because it's a 2-inch and it's going to wet out pretty easy. But the biggest problem you'll have with 4-inch is you'll be wetting it out, and what you want to do is you want to disperse that slug. So if you've got a 4-inch and it's 40 feet long, you got 40 pounds of resin that you'll see when we wet this out what it's going to look like. So you're going to have a slug like this long, and there's a couple things that work against you in resin: mass, temperature, okay, and sun, but not as much sun, but just mass and temperature. So the larger the mass, the quicker the cure time. The higher the temperature, quicker the cure time. So for every degree, it's about 10 minutes. So it's pretty dramatic. Okay. So what you want to do is when you're wetting out is disperse that whole slug all the way to the end, and then bring it back through. Because if you leave it in a big slug,
it starts curing.
Right.
So activating.
The key with the resins is these things. So it's molecules, and they have to create their own heat. That's what ambient is, right? Mm-hmm. So they have to start moving around. So when they're cold, they can't move around. So they're really slow, so they can't create their own heat.
It's also really thick, isn't it? Like really.
It's thick, but I mean, it's pretty thick. It's probably a little bit thicker than oil, like cool oil.
Not bad.
So when it can't create its own heat, it takes longer to cure. So in the wintertime in Canada, we wet out at the shop, drive 45 minutes to the job site, you know, and put it in because we just had all kinds of time because all the resins were cool. It was cool outside. So like in El Paso, what we did was they have a perliner trailer, and so they've got rollers and they have the big vat. And all we did is we threw the resins in the cooler because it was like about 100 that day, and we did about a 50, actually both of the same, about 54 4-inch and a 54 2-inch. And we just put the resins in the bucket of ice. Then when we wet it out, put it through the rollers and put the liner right back into the bucket of ice. Okay. And then that liner was like, I think it was like 46 when we took it out of that ice. So we had all kinds of time. So it's all about controlling temperature and your volumes. Okay. It's all about that. This thing is your best friend. So when you're wetting out, when we're taping, you'll see it, when we're taping, you got to take temperature shots, and you got to know your temperature, your starting temperature. So if your starting temperature is 71, and all of a sudden you're doing a 4-inch, and you're taking temperatures, and you hit an 86, now you got to go because that thing is starting. It's now created enough heat where it's now starting to go. So when you have a spike of almost 10 degrees from when you started to what you're doing, that's telling you, hey, clock's ticking. Let's get this thing in the ground.
At what point do you need to just bail on?
You'll know.
Be rigid.
So, and again, a lot of it will come with experience, but it's not rigid, but it'll get so hot you can't touch it.
Okay. And or then you can't pull it.
Right. And it won't expand because now the resin that is folded is now sticking together.
Yeah.
So it won't expand. So when you're putting it in, so the guy feeding it, he's going to have all the control. Okay. You see smoke coming out of the pipe and it's hot.
Pull it out.
Pull it out.
Okay.
Get rid of it.
Okay.
You know? So and that's, you just got to know that.
Okay.
And the worst thing you can do is remember, the nice thing about this stuff is you're controlling until you inflate it. If you got to abort, get it out of there. Don't jack with it. Don't try to jam it in because again, as soon as you start to jam this stuff in, that's when shit starts to go on.
Yeah.
So just know it. And you'll know it. You'll feel it. It'll get pretty hot. I mean, if we're doing 4-inch in the bucket, this bucket, if we leave it about that much in the bucket, it'll go to about 420 degrees. So it'll get hot. You'll know it. Believe me. And you'll start to smell it. You know, you'll get used to the smells. You'll start to smell resins going off. You'll see a little bit of smoke. You know, and typically the smoke comes out of the fold because that's where the mass is.
Yeah.
So those are all just little things. We won't see any of that today on the 2-inch because again, it's thin felt and we're mixing 3.5 pounds.
2 pounds. 2.5
Yeah,
pounds.
2.5 pounds. So I mean, again, but with 4-inch, each one of these pails is 55 pounds. So you have a 55 footer, you're mixing a full pail. It's actually a little less because you can't mix it in a full one. So you're probably going to be about 45 pounds per pail of mixed resin. So.
Yeah. Okay.
So
awesome.
All right, so before we do any mixing, again, 2-inch, we got lots of time, but before we do any mixing, we want to make sure our compressor's working, all of our air hoses are there. We want to make sure everything is in place. So you just want to kind of walk through everything. Typically, whenever we do these types of things, guys, you know, number 1 guy is doing his ends and stuff like that. Number 2 guy is walking the site, making sure compressor's ready to go, compressor's plugged in, outlet is tested, you know, compressor's full of air, so that when it's in place, you know, it's just go. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, so let's get the compressor over to the hole.